Well, good Thursday morning. It's another rainy day. Wouldn't you love to be at home with a good book? I would. But I'm not. I'm here today and again with a story for you, and this time we're going to go back to the Old Testament. There's a man in the Old Testament, a prophet, whose name is Samuel. Very briefly, Samuel was his mother's only child. She prayed for him in the house of the Lord at Shiloh, and God answered her prayer with a child. When he was old enough, she brought him to the Lord's house at Shiloh, where Eli was the current prophet. She wanted him to grow up with Eli and to learn to know God. In the 3rd chapter of 1 Kings, we hear about Samuel being called. He is sleeping in the Lord's house when he hears a voice and calling his name. And so Samuel assumes, excuse me, that it's Eli calling him. And he goes to his master, the prophet Eli, and says, what you need? And Eli says, go back to bed. I didn't call you. And it happens again. And again, Eli says, I promise I didn't call you. Please go back to bed. The 3rd time, Eli is not a quick study, shall we say. Eli realizes that something different is going on. That Samuel is indeed hearing a real voice calling his name, and that the one calling his name is God. And he tells Samuel to go back and lie down. And he said, if he calls you again, say to him, Lord, here I am. Your servant is listening. That's what it is. Your servant is listening. And certainly God does call him a 4th time, and he replies, your servant is listening. And God gives Samuel his first prophecy, and that is that all that God has promised will happen to Eli, because Eli's family was not all they ought to be, shall we say, was going to come true. Samuel didn't want to tell Eli. He stayed in the bed until morning, until Eli came and got him up. And Eli insisted that Samuel tell him what God had said. And he related all of it, didn't hold anything back. And from that time on, Samuel was the prophet of God. And people, 1 Kings says, from Dan to Beersheba, knew who he was in Shiloh, and they listened to him. Some of you already know that I've been doing a lot of reading and research and practicing with listening to God. I think that that's the hardest thing that any of us can learn to do, is to listen to God. And God speaks to us in lots of different ways. This story illustrates one way that God speaks to human beings, and that is in an audible voice. There are those of you out there who say, yeah, he used to, but I don't believe that God continues today to speak to people in an audible voice. You are certainly entitled to your own opinion, but I have known human beings who profess to have heard an audible voice from God. And I believe that these people are telling the truth. I believe that God continues to speak to us in the ways that he always has. We'll talk about some of those in other ways in weeks to come. But for sure, God does continue to speak in an audible voice. Now, in the biblical record, there aren't very many times that God speaks in an audible voice. Here, when Jesus is baptized, and with Saul on the road to Damascus. And in all of the biblical record, that is not very many times. So I would say to you that if you have not heard someone who says that they've heard from God speaking in an audible voice, that's really not unusual, because that is not the preferred method for God to speak to humans. But that does not mean that it doesn't happen today. I hope that you will open your minds to hearing God, that you will present yourselves in his presence to listen to what he has to say to you this week and in the weeks to come. It is Thursday. I hope you're planning to be in church on Sunday. just as we did last week, this week we will be at First Baptist Church in Gastonia, and we will observe some time of silence where the congregation can listen to God. I hope that if you're interested that you'll show up there at 11 o'clock and join me. And if you're not, that doesn't mean that you can't practice your own time of silence sometime during the rest of this week. Have a great day, and I will see you next week with another story from the Bible. Again, my name is Susan Haney. I don't think I said that at the beginning, but I am Susan Haney, and I'm glad to be here with you. Thank you for your time. Bye-bye.